Ruminating Reverends, Series 1, Episode 3. And this month, sponsored by Jesus. In front of me today are... It's not that funny, Ron, don't worry.
It is. I can see you getting sad.
In front of me today are Daddy Shark, Ron Allison, and Baby Shark, Graham Lamb. I could have gone with Grandpa Shark, but I decided Baby. Is that okay with you?
I suppose so.
Is that not a song?
Yeah, Baby Shark.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not singing it. I know the words.
You know the words.
The words are basically Baby Shark.
Why do you know the words? Okay.
And this week, it's all about forgiveness to tie in with, it's Easter. We're filming this on the 1st of April, so we're coming up to Good Friday. And what does Good Friday represent in terms of forgiveness and on Easter Sunday? But first, everyone's favourite part of the show. It's when I ask questions and you give me an answer. So for this week, I'm going to ask you one question and I want you to justify your answer. So, or try and convince everyone else. So pitch it, I guess is the right word. So, if the podcast had a sponsor, who would it be and why? So Ron, you can go first.
Oh, crumbs. I can't think. It really put me on the spot. You got one.
Well, I presume if somebody is sponsoring us, does that mean that we're getting like goodies and freebies as a result of this sponsorship?
We're getting something.
We're getting something.
And what investment are they getting?
Investment, yeah. I don't know. The thing that pops into my head is like anyone who makes vanilla cheesecake, so I can get some free vanilla cheesecake. But we probably want something more serious, don't we?
No, I think Hale and Pace.
Hale and Pace. Are they still going?
Or what was it? Smith.
Alas Smith and Jones.
What did you say earlier? Two white middle-aged
men. Yeah.
Men.
Yeah.
Talking into vacuous space of echo chamber.
So could we just be sponsored by Marks and Spencer then?
I think I want to be. I'm going to be sponsored by a brewery because you need to drink to listen to this.
So a brewery and a cheesecake.
Brewery and the cheesecake maker
company.
Yeah, you weren't expecting serious answers to this, were you?
I was expecting you to justify your answers, but I think you've done that.
Cheesecake is lovely.
Fairly well. Okay, I'm now going to ask you a couple of questions, and I want you to tell me whether you strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree with the statement. So, pineapple on pizza.
Disagree.
Agree, actually. I'm very open to pizza toppings.
AI for written work.
Agree,
yeah. For suggestions in particular and directions.
Not for the whole thing.
Here's a controversial one. Hot dogs or sandwiches?
Oh.
Are you talking like sausage sandwich because we're talking hot dogs?
Yeah, just a hot dog.
Yeah, they are.
Hot dog. Oh, yeah. I think hot dogs because of the onion, which has got to be proper yellow English mustard. Nice hot onions, and it works better than sandwich.
Proper sandwich.
Yeah.
One for you now, Ron. The snooze button is the greatest invention of all time.
Absolutely.
I thought you might like that.
Yeah, particularly when I'm speaking.
That's your mute button, isn't it?
Yeah, mute button. I was thinking mute.
You're asking for my opinion. On the snooze button, I don't tend to use it. So.
And finally, the book is always better than the movie.
Oh.
Not always. Often, yes, but not always. I'm trying to think of a really good example. Arguably, this is where my love of Stephen King comes in. Arguably, the film, because we're in England, The Shawshank Redemption is arguably better than the original short story, which was Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption.
So, that's all for now. I'm going to leave it to you two. We're going to start our conversation on forgiveness now. So, Yeah, I will leave it to you two. I'll interrupt with a couple of questions occasionally as well, just to sort of
Spice it up a bit.
stoke up the debate, I guess,
Okay.
is something to say. But yeah, over to you two.
Forgiveness is one of those issues, isn't it, that affects all people in all times and
Yeah.
raises lots of passions in people, and also raises lots of vulnerabilities because people often live with struggling with forgiveness.
Yeah, a lot of people live quite often with unforgiveness that they've been carrying for a long time. Either where they haven't been forgiven or where they've not forgiven themselves as well.
Yeah, I think that's
Either way. And probably quite often for most people, probably actually a bit of both.
I know a couple of years ago we did a sermon series on forgiveness, and we touched on all those topics for about 6 weeks, and it was quite lengthy, and it really had an effect on people in terms of how it was received, but also the issues that it raised in people's lives, because they're always pertinent. I mean, we only have to look in, present any experiences, but present day stuff in the news. I was looking at, listening to a tiny bit of Starmer's interview that he did the other day, being very careful about how he spoke about Trump and responded and talked about relationship and still wants a relationship once they get through this. And obviously, you can imagine behind closed doors, he's wanted to respond in a particular, he's responded in a different way, perhaps. Because in the public domain, he's been vilified, and the British people have, and our armed forces have. So what do you say in response to that? And that, in some ways, that's a trivial thing, but it's a very national thing and a very pertinent at the moment.
I think, yeah.
But for the Prime Minister, it's not. It's because how does he, as a leader of this nation, respond?
Yeah, it's the impact of all that as well, isn't it?
Impact,
Yeah. And I think that's a personal thing as well. Do we like, show forgiveness publicly, but actually we don't privately? Potentially, sometimes we don't. We'll never. We don't know exactly what's going on.
So you
for
can
all
hold
people,
grudges even if you
yeah,
say
and that's it, isn't it? And forgiveness isn't sort of forgetting, but it's how you remember, to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That's one of the things that I remember preaching on. It's a passage in Isaiah. I will remember your sins no more. It's not that God has amnesia and just says, "Oh, do that," or chooses, or can't remember, or whatever else, chooses not to remember. Well, it's active. I choose not to remember. I choose not to bring this into the present. I choose not to allow this to impede the relationship. I choose this not to have power.
Yeah.
And it's an active thing. So God does that to us. Your sins and wickedness I will remember no more, and they're cast into the sea, or as far as the east is from the west, I have removed them. So they're not coming into play. And that's the trick. That's the model in that sense, that it's not we're going, oh, forgive and forget, and it's all really trite and it's all really vague and it's all really doesn't deal with the issue. It's I choose not to allow this
to impact the relationship. Yeah, and that's the huge thing that forgiveness does impact, I think, on, in particular. Whether you are being forgiven or whether you are doing the one forgiving, I think it massively impacts your relationship with the people involved in that particular dynamic.
Yeah.
For the best. And also, obviously, that large part of that as well is the extent that it impacts our relationship with God. And that's sort of the key element there from that point of view. Forgive as we have been forgiven.
Yeah.
As well. For that.
And so there's that reciprocal nature in that, isn't it? That there's that really stark verse. If you do not forgive, you will not be forgiven.
Yeah.
And it's how you unpack that and what that means and process that. Because forgiveness costs.
And I think that's the bit we quite often struggle with, actually. And sometimes what it costs us is power over that person.
Yeah.
And we don't like that always.
Yeah.
I think we can't or power and influence and then again it goes back to what you were saying a few minutes ago. It makes us vulnerable. Forgiving is some ways it's a form of surrender, in a way. But it makes us vulnerable as well. And we don't always like being vulnerable. We like to be in a position where we have that control over the... Not necessarily strong control, but control over the situation.
Yeah.
Whereas forgiveness, genuine forgiveness, sort of takes that away. But it should do. It should do. Because we're letting loose of some of that control, which is holding us back.
I think also there's the other bit that goes along with that is to forgive seems to allow the offence to be just forgotten and trivialise it, depending on what the offence is.
Yeah.
And how deeply it affects us. So it's kind of letting go of something that needs to be held off because this is really important.
Yeah.
And I think that brings us to the nub of the Christian understanding of that. So it does make us feel vulnerable. And so that's psychologized in our culture. You see this in memes and in psychology literature about forgiveness as the act of healing yourself from bitterness and pain and sorrow, because all unforgiveness does, it doesn't do anything to the other person, it just harms yourself. And everyone knows this psychologically and physiologically. It causes all kinds of problems with, blood pressure,
stress, anxiety, etc.
Strokes and all kinds of stuff. And I have met people who have lived with deep and long-lasting unforgiveness that's turned into hardened bitterness.
Yeah,
and it's etched in them. So there is that kind of what it does to yourself, which is really important. But the Christian understanding is also, it's about that relationship. Now, I know that's trite, and they've got more to say on that, which I don't know whether to do now or a bit later on. But it's other focus. Like we talked about love last time, love is other focus. So forgiveness is it's supposed to be a form of love. So how do you do that when you're in pain because of a situation? Or maybe the person or thing that's happened has passed into history, or the person's died. So you can't actually forgive in that sense them for the relationship. It is about how you're processing pain, and that's really powerful. And that's where the vulnerability bit comes in, isn't it? And
yeah, definitely. And we seem to be reluctant sometimes to be vulnerable, which I understand. It's. Sometimes it can feel like a scary world, can't it?
Yeah.
And we're sort of opening ourselves up in lots of ways, taking risks. And life is very much about taking risks. Social interaction is about taking risks.
Yeah.
Which means if you're taking risks, there's going to be mistakes. We're going to make mistakes. Other people are going to make mistakes. Yeah. If we're not willing to forgive, I think that's the starter. Sometimes you have to be willing to forgive before you're able to forgive.
Yeah.
So you talk about being willing to forgive. Obviously, if someone has an argument, there's two different ways to that argument. You've got you and then you've got the other person. In that sort of sense, if the other person isn't willing to forgive, I guess, what should you do then? If you're willing to forgive the other person, but the other person isn't willing to forgive you, should it be mutual, or should you forgive anyone?
I think that's a really interesting question, actually. A possibly controversial answer is, this probably sounds really, really harsh. I don't quite mean it on this. It's not my concern in some ways if somebody else isn't willing to forgive, although it will damage the relationship, obviously. You're presuming, is this a sort of situation where we don't know who's right? And that's part of the issue sometimes here, isn't it? It's actually not necessarily always about forgiveness initially, I think. It's about somebody thinking that they're right. And if they can't let go of the fact that that they're right, and they may or may not be right, then they're not going to move to that position where they're willing to forgive, because they see nothing to forgive because they're absolutely right. So is there a sense sometimes actually that one of the things we have to let go of, and again it's a sort of control and vulnerability thing, is sometimes the need to be right?
I think that's the case. It depends what the situation is.
Yeah, very
right
much
wrong,
so.
Doesn't it?
And how serious the situation is.
Yeah, exactly. But and I think the other bit in terms of that is how important is the relationship? So say it's a long-standing friendship, or it's a marriage or other kind of partnership. And is that relationship, friendship, marriage, partnership, whatever else, bigger than the two individuals? So are you wanting to keep this relationship, so you will negotiate because the relationship's too important? Or are you happy just to walk away from the relationship? And I think that's another part in that as well. So there's a kind of negotiation with that, isn't it?
Is it two deep long-term friends, or is it just two acquaintances? And, all sorts of different, and and again, what was it actually about?
One of the things which I remember talking about was, do we just offer forgiveness? And I don't think we do. And I think, and this is controversial because it's not often thought of in this way, that forgiveness is just something that Christians splatter around in a kind of easy manner. Oh, just forgive, forgive, forgive. But Jesus says, he commands us to forgive 70 times 7. So in other words, as anyone who knows, keep forgiving. It's supposed to be endless. But he gives it a caveat. If a person comes to you and asks for forgiveness. So I think we don't need to be overly liberal with forgiveness and just washing it around all over the place. But it's about that when that person comes to you in that transactional way to restore that relationship, I am sorry, then we are duty bound to say, yes, I forgive. And all the texts in that get overlooked because Jesus keeps saying when they come to you and ask for forgiveness. But we're supposed to have a heart that is willing to forgive.
Yeah, but it doesn't necessarily have to be public all the time.
No, it doesn't have to be public.
Yeah.
No.
Because I think there's a sense as well, if you're constantly going up to people going, oh, I forgive you, that creates an almost false power dynamic.
And that's weird.
Which you're trying to show, oh yeah, I'm the more forgiving one here.
Yeah.
And it can almost be a race.
And I think the other one is forgiveness is a journey.
Yeah.
And pastorally, I've done this with people and with myself, that it might not be complete in this life.
Yeah.
Because we all are broken and sinful, perhaps because relationships can be shattered and completely irreparable at that point, that it's not till the end of time that the fullness of that forgiveness might be known. And so it's a journey, because I know when people become Christians and they harbour things about unforgiveness, it can become a huge burden on them. And I've talked this through with a few people in terms of that journey towards forgiveness.
Yeah.
That may not yet be complete.
It's something we often struggle with, is the idea that we're meant to become perfect Christians really quickly.
Yeah.
And that goes back to what I was talking about before, about quite often the being willing to forgive comes before the being able to forgive.
Yeah.
And it is part of that journey. I can think of, one or two people that I've struggled to forgive over the years, where I'm much closer to it now.
Yeah.
I'm much closer to it now, and I can see that journey, and I can see that journey is like, I'm about 16, 17 years in with one individual I can think of, but I'm much further down that road of forgiveness than I was.
Yeah. And there's been things in my life and in the life of my family where there's been huge issues that are serious and legal issues in terms of people's lives that people struggle with in terms of forgiveness, things that have happened to them, and what they do with that. And quite often people just make the choice, I will never forgive, because it's so painful, because it's so serious, because it's so illegal or whatever else. And that is, and you can't just say, well, you must forgive.
Yeah, it's not that easy. It's not that easy. So you've got to be willing.
Which comes down to, I think, in forgiveness, there's a sense, you talked about wanting to be right. There's a sense of justice all the time.
Yes.
Underneath all
yeah,
this,
definitely.
There's a sense of fairness and justice. This should not have happened, and you've done it to me.
Yeah, and they've not been punished for it. Therefore, I'm not going to forgive or something like that. Yeah.
And so in the Christian understanding, there is punishment. So
Yeah.
Jesus takes our punishment on the cross so that we might be forgiven. And on the cross he says, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. So there's that. And there's a bit in Romans 12. And I remember talking this through with one particular person a long time ago, and it really helped them with an issue. Where Paul talks about do not enact revenge, but do good to those who persecute you and hate you, that you can heap burning coals on their heads. For, and this is the interesting bit, leave a space for God's wrath. For it is up to the Lord to revenge. And it's this bit of leaving a space, and I think that's the bit where we struggle, because Jesus has taken our punishment for the things that we have done wrong so that we might be forgiven. So he's taken punishment. There is justice being done there. But there's also the end of time punishment. And we live in that space where we're looking to the ultimate justice at the end of time, when Christians believe all things will be rectified and fairly and rightly and righteously. And so you give it to God.
Yeah, it's about trusting God.
Trusting God in it and giving it over. And I think that journey into forgiveness is that constant. You talked about 17 years or whatever. Yeah. It's that constant giving it over to God.
Yeah,
saying,
yeah,
you've got this, Lord. You can sort this, Lord.
Yeah.
And I said, when I talked with this person years ago, it was like 20 years ago. And I said, effectively, you have to say, my dad's bigger than your dad.
Yeah.
He will sort this out. And it's that trusting. So there's a lot of faith that comes in here.
Yeah, it's that sort of confidence that you don't have to carry it.
Yeah.
It's a burden that God will carry.
And that's where the psychological health comes in.
Yeah.
It's not that you're just whitewashing over something.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
But you're giving it over to God to say, this will be made right.
Yeah.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, and it kind of ties on to sort of on the cross and that sort of thing, is if you give forgiveness to someone else, how can that heal you? So we know that it can heal the other person, but how does it affect you, the person that's giving forgiveness? Like, how can it heal?
I'm going to use a really trite example that in productivity circles these days, everyone's talking about it, and I think it comes from David Allen originally and other people. They talk about open loops in your brain. If you've got a thing to do, and you've not dealt with it, you've not parked it somewhere, written it down, or managed it in some way, it's constantly playing in your brain. Now that's just life. That in the same way unforgiveness does that. It's an open loop, and it becomes a sore in your psyche. And so until there is some kind of closure of that loop, there's some kind of resolution in some way or other, and that gets closed, then the healing happens. So you close that loop, you park it effectively. So in the Old Testament, in the Jewish scriptures, in Hebrew, what is salvation? It's shalom, it's healing, it's peace. And it includes all the forgiveness stuff. So we're always seeking to move to peace and forgiveness. So the justice stuff on the cross and at the end of time is not the end goal. That's part of the process. The end goal is perfection and peace. And so we get snippets of that now as we offer and live in forgiveness to ourselves and to one another.
And that sort of withholding forgiveness can sort of limit the amount of joy that we can receive in the present. Just sort of, again, with that open loop, just sort of cutting us off to a certain extent from what's around us, because we're carrying this burden, we're carrying this negativity, which just closes us off from sort of the joy and peace that is around us.
Which is what I said, and you will have done, met people who've lived with unforgiveness that's etched into bitterness in the face in their lives.
We'll have seen it in many, many funerals over the years, won't we, in particular?
Yeah.
That's probably where we most often see it, actually, in some ways. Yeah.
Which is why quite often sometimes there's a fight, isn't there, in some circumstances afterwards.
Yeah, because it all simmers up.
Yeah.
It all simmers up.
all those unresolved things that people bury and don't deal with. So the whole thought about forgiveness is, in some ways, and I say this very carefully, a kind of psychodynamic process. You're dealing with people at really deep levels. This is about inner healing. It's about relationship healing. And ultimately, it's about creational healing between God and us.
Yeah.
So on the cross, the classic understanding, and it's only part of what the cross is that Jesus takes on himself the punishment that he would uphold as the divine Son of God in righteousness upon himself for creation and for people. And he absorbs that within himself so that he can then offer, well, not so that he already does offer the forgiveness, but so that the loop is closed. The forgiveness is complete. It is finished, he says at the end of Good Friday, and offers himself to his Father. And that's what we want. We all want to be totally forgiven. We all want that freedom. We might not want to give it to other people, but we want it for ourselves.
But do we totally want to forgive other people?
Yeah.
Do we totally want other people to be forgiven?
And
I think that's a bigger question.
There is the question of, how do you forgive yourself? Because I know some people really struggle with that, and depending on how we've hurt. And then there is a God who isn't just enacting justice, but calling us back to himself, saying, come to me and rest. I have sorted this, and I will sort this. Abide in my love, remain in my peace. Know my shalom, my wholeness. And that's a journey in itself.
I was just thinking that again. There's people, Christians will know that in their head, but to actually properly understand that in your heart, in your psyche, in terms of what you've said, that is a journey which for some Christians that could be 20, 30 years in.
And it also takes you out of yourself, because it's not something you can fix yourself, because your selfhood is bound up with this unforgiveness. So you can't actually deal with it outside of yourself. Something else has to happen to you to be forgiven. And Christians believe that God does that to you. And you hear his word, you are forgiven, go and sin no more, or you are forgiven. And then I think what we have to do is keep looking back to the cross, keep looking back to who Jesus is. So you replace the unforgiveness and the self with the man on the cross who you love more.
It's
always into him.
It's always a central focus of forgiveness is going back to the cross.
And seeing that, and that's for you.
It's where the great forgiveness comes from.
So I think we're coming to the end of the podcast now, so I'll just ask one more question as a closing thought. We've talked a lot about Good Friday and how that represents forgiveness. Let's focus on Easter Day for a couple minutes. Like, how does that sort of further the point of forgiveness from Good Friday?
I've got a Bible verse on that. I don't know if you want to respond with anything.
Sort of going back to what you're saying a little bit, my words will probably fail me now because my brain is starting to go towards the end of the podcast. You were talking about the cross not being the end a few minutes ago, which then makes the resurrection the beginning of something new, different, wonderful, almost the manifestation of the forgiveness in a way, which starts then to live out our lives as we live these new, hopefully joyful lives in the light of the resurrection. So that's where it sort of comes for me.
So we can focus on the cross, which is right and proper, but we can almost see the resurrection as an add-on.
Yeah.
And they're both one and of the same event. So Paul talks about he died for our sins, for our trespasses, but he was raised for our justification, which means on the cross he died for what we did wrong. In resurrection, he shows that we are made right. We are justified. We are, as the old phrase was, just as if I'd never sinned. We are made perfect by his resurrection. So it is new life. It is a new way of living. So we don't just focus on punishment and cross, but resurrection, and as you're saying, new experience, new life, new way of being. And it's growing into that. And the whole journey of faith is that constant cycle of death and resurrection, death and resurrection. And all the spiritual traditions within Christianity focus on that in some way or other. And that brings you then shalom, healing, reconciliation. And then there's a bit in Romans 8 where it says, the whole of creation is waiting for the revealing of the sons of God. So there's this image of trees and flowers in springtime watching for the children of God to be revealed, that they may be made perfect. And I just think, however you put that together, that image in terms of ecology and everything else is just absolutely fabulous. It centers on the relationship of children of God that have this massive impact on the rest of creation through the cross and the death and resurrection of Jesus. And it's there in that we live, and not in the bitterness of unforgiveness.
Yeah.
So I think we'll leave that at as the end of this episode. Like we did last time, I'm going to ask you both for a Bible verse that we can sort of reflect on throughout the month before we come back in May. So, Ron?
There's just so many, but I guess, the one I mentioned earlier, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they do. That's the heartbeat of Jesus.
And for you, Graham?
Mine basically more or less has the same theme, actually, the parable of the unforgiving servant in Matthew 18. Forgiven people must become forgiving people.
Okay, so that's it for this month. If you'd like to see more of Ron and Graham, we do live stream our 10:45 services, of which from time to time Ron does a sermon and Graham does occasionally as well. This podcast is available on both Spotify and YouTube. It's made by Christchurch Morton, and we will see you in May. Goodbye.
Arrivederci.
Have a lovely Easter.
Easter blessings on everyone.
And if there are any cheesecake manufacturers who wish to sponsor us, talk to me.
I need a beer now.